Thomas, Coach Welch has volunteered to go first. So take it away, Thomas.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Tom Coates Welch. I am a first grade special education teacher in New Orleans. And let me just share my screen here and double check you guys can see it. All right, can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Looks good.
Right. So the project that I chose to take on was to analyze the OneApp application process. So to look at community reactions to the centralized charter enrollment in New Orleans. And the core question that I wanted to investigate was, how do OneApp prioritization factors impact students and families? So for those who are not familiar with the OneApp process, New Orleans has a central enrollment application for every open enrollment charter school in New Orleans. There are a few schools that still don't use the OneApp, but they're primarily the selective enrollment schools. Parents across the whole city can apply to any school which is on that OneApp list, no matter how far away they live from the school. And the form allows them to rank up to 12 schools in order of preference. So what this looks like for parents is they rank these schools and then they get a single school placement for each child back. And if they want, they can take that, or if they want, they can turn it down and reapply for round 2. But because it's first come, first serve, there's usually less spots available in the second round at the high demand schools. And then families can also transfer students mid-year, but they have to use that OneApp process again. So it's like the central hub for school applications in a school district where almost all schools are charter schools. Now, all that ranking is not actually the only factor that goes into placing students. The school placement is determined by a matching algorithm, which is a proprietary algorithm, and they don't like to tell people what's going on with it. The local news has filed Freedom of Information requests to see how the matching algorithm works, and they've not disclosed how that works, despite transparency being one of the 3 core principles that's listed on their website. There's 3 major factors that determine where students have their placement determined. The ranking by parents is one of them, but it's also determined by siblings and geography. And we talked a little bit earlier, but it doesn't include some of the selective enrollment schools such as Lasher, Ben Franklin High School, and Lake Forest. So the ranking is fairly easy to understand. Families can rank up to 12 schools in order of preference, and the higher performing schools typically have a lower match rate due to the high number of families that are making them their first choice and the limited number of spots at those schools. The siblings is another consideration. If a student applies to a school where they have a sibling who's already enrolled, their application will be weighted. They'll have a higher chance of getting a placement at that school. And then each school has their own sibling verification policy. Doing the research for this project, I discovered that some schools, it was as simple as sending an email with like a scan of documents, whereas other schools, you had to show up in a 4-hour window with the original copies of documents such as birth certificates to verify sibling eligibility for a school spot. And so that can be, very discriminatory for families that don't have the opportunity to go during that 4-hour window in the school day. And then there's also very little mention of accommodations for blended families, students who may be living with cousins, and other factors that, may be important for family placements. And then if a family submits a OneApp for multiple children to attend the same school, those students can receive a family link weighted preference for schools that have this availability for all students. So this can mean that students or families that have a lot of kids, if there's a family with like say 6 students, there's going to be much fewer schools that have 6 open spots in those particular grades. than, you know, for a family with one or two children. And so it can mean that those larger families get a lower ranked school as a result. And then the final factor that a lot of people don't know about, and we'll talk a little about the results later, is the geography. So 25% of available seats at any given school are prioritized for families in the same geographic catchment zones. And you can see on this map here that they're effectively like 2 or 3 zip codes lumped together. And this is not accurately listed on the New Orleans Public School website currently. So it's confusing for families. They also prioritize 25% of the seats for applicants who live within a half mile of the school. And again, that's also not mentioned on a lot of the documentation from New Orleans Public Schools. And then when they release the data for schools that get their, or families that get their top picks, this year, 82% of applicants are matched with one of their top 3 choices, which is much higher this year than previous years, and it's unclear why that might be this year. So this is going to be an area where like ongoing research will be important. The high demand schools, though, are still much harder to get into, as low as a 10% chance of getting in for schools such as Audubon Gentilly. And so due to these policies, the existing literature supports the findings that the families that benefit are the ones who are living in high income zip codes, because that's where the highest performing schools are located. And then also white families who are 60% more likely to live within a half mile of a high demand school. And the 9 highest demand elementary schools are located in zip codes with above average income levels. So to generate authentic community and opinions around the subject, a survey was developed to generate those kind of responses and experiences from parents and families who use the One App. Responses were pulled from social media, from parent-teacher relationships, and then also from interpersonal connections. Thank you to everybody who is on the Zoom today who helped pass this on to family members or friends. We got 26 responses from around the city. And the findings were interesting. So 51% of families described themselves as familiar or very familiar with the One App process. But then 50% of families said that they were unfamiliar with how the geographic preference worked. And 65% said that they weren't familiar with how it uses other data to prioritize students. So there's a big information gap for families right now with how the One App works and the amount of transparency around it. The family's priorities listed in the survey were largely aligned with the One App. So there's a clear preference for matching siblings and then for matching students who live closer to schools. A lot of people expressed a preference for neighborhood schools. There were a lot of conflicting opinions in the results on prioritizing students who qualified for a free or reduced lunch. 30% said that that was not important at all, while 27% said that was very important for them. And then there was an extremely strong preference for a public and transparent process for the One App. 96% said that that was very important to them. So at the end of the survey, there was an open response question that asked about what concerns or feedback that they had about the One App matching process. And this generated the most useful anecdotal data for this survey, because it revealed a widespread dissatisfaction with the One App system that's not being reported elsewhere, particularly in the NOLA PS press releases or the local reporting by NOLA.com. Sample responses included that it was very confusing and time consuming, that it seemed to be a game of total chance, and people who can afford private schools will do so, and those who can't have to play the lottery. And how the process works is a mystery and not disclosed to the general public. One person said that they think teachers should be trained on what the One App process is so that they can support families better in advocating for the desired placement. This one I thought was interesting as a teacher myself. I don't feel like this is part of my job to advocate for families in school placement, particularly as that would frequently in that kind of position be students applying for a different school than the one that I work at. One person said that everyone should automatically be accepted into the school that's nearest them. So again, with the idea of neighborhood schools, and then only using the one app for parents that wanted to send their child to a school across town. And then one person just said, it's horrible. So despite the higher match rates, families remain dissatisfied and underinformed about the one app process. The geographic preference gives a clear advantage right now to higher income and white families. And then those high demand schools, such as bricolage or Audubon Gentili, are still very difficult to get placed in. And so the recommendations from the results of the survey would be to make the one app algorithm public and transparent, to publish a true spectrum of family experiences, including negative experiences, and then to ensure that the information that's available to families is accurate and true, because we found a lot of outdated information on the one app site. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Were there any questions? I'm just catching up on the chat now, too.
Thank you, Tom. Marge has her hand up.
Hi, Tom. That was quite eye-opening. Someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with charter schools. I mean, more things change and more they stay the same in some instances, because of course this has been this privileges people with privilege already. Not a big surprise there. But I have two questions for you, and one of them is simpler than the other. Are these charter schools centralized? Like, are they all part of the same district, like a school district, or are they all independent agencies?
So there's kind of sub hierarchies. The charters are either single school charters, or sometimes there'll be a CMO, a charter management organization like KIP, or some like local New Orleans specific ones that will have multiple schools. And those all fall under the Orleans Parish School Board, who their function is to like basically renew these charters or take back the charters if they feel like the schools are not doing a good enough job, but they don't, like the Orleans Parish School Board doesn't do any direct managing of schools. It's just individual charters or individual charter networks.
Okay, that cleared up a little bit. Thank you. And my second question is, how do schools become high demand schools? Is it because of their neighborhood? Is it because they're magnet schools and they offer a particular curriculum? I mean, what makes a school high demand? I know it's a complicated question. It probably has a very complicated answer.
And I mean, I think it's a good question. So the vision, generously, like the vision, I think, was that a high demand school would be one with good academic outcomes. So the state is rating each school sort of an A, B, C, D. And then they also get like a growth rating, and those are published. And so when you're doing your one app, like that's one of the big pieces of information that you get published by the city on the one app is what the grade is for both the actual grade and the growth grade. In practice, I think that you see some of the high demand schools also being schools that are offering like a particular vision of education. Like I'm thinking of, there's a school called Bricolage in particular, that when it was founded was taking a very sort of progressive social justice type philosophy that wasn't necessarily, I'm hesitating because I know that from people looking at Bricolage that the vision in practice was not necessarily the same. But there are certainly schools that were sort of marketing themselves as something different. And that was also like why they were high demand, not just the letter grades. But it's a complicated question.
Just to chime in, Marge, because I have more teaching experience in Orleans than Tom. I was here way before pre-Katrina. But most of the high demand schools were our magnet schools pre-Katrina.
Thanks, Larry. And the UTNO Zoom account is reminding me in the chat that some of the schools are authorized from BESI, which is like the State Board of Education. And then some of them are authorized by the city. So it's a mess. It's real complicated.
Yeah, our school district could be titled. It's complicated. All right, if there are no more questions for Tom, Arnold Little is scheduled to go next.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Janae. I had a question.
Go ahead.
I went on the on my phone to look at the One app. It looked like it could be a fairly simple process, but if I was moving to the area, how would I know what school my child would be able to go to, and what would be the good, what would be ranked as the better schools? Is that information on the One app, or is that something you have to do your research on your own? And if I was coming from a different state, how would I know that information?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've definitely worked with families that have like come in mid-year, in particularly, who are coming from a different state and are super frustrated with the sort of lack of information. I think in practice, like people end up calling the school board to see where they can put their kids, and then they're linked to sort of One app through that, and they can go through that process like in the middle of the year. And then to answer your question about like which school do you pick, I see Latasha saying like researching on our own and word of mouth. That's certainly like part of it. Like ask your friends, ask your neighbors. And then there's the grades, the letter grades for each school, I think are on there when you're picking the school. But past that, yeah, the information for parents is just not good enough right now.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. I like the One app idea, but I can see where it could be kind of confusing and some issues because of the non-transparency. Okay, great job, Tom.
Thanks. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you.